Welcome back to Last Dictarin, the place where we bring to light the forgotten stories that hide in history's darkest corners. Today, we travel back to 1850, into the rolling hills of southern Alabama, where the name Ellison was once mentioned only in quiet, uneasy whispers. In an age when cotton ruled the South and great fortunes rose on the labor of the enslaved, the Ellison family ranked among Alabama's elite. Their tale, handed down across generations, stands as a haunting warning. Neither wealth nor high standing can shield anyone from forces that refuse to be explained. As we step into their past, brace yourself for a mystery that has chilled the region for more than a century and a half. One that remains unsolved even now. The Ellison plantation rose proudly across endless acres of cotton fields stretching to the horizon. At its heart stood a grand two-story mansion of gleaming white columns and rich dark mahogany, built by the very hands that fueled the family's growing riches. Locals called it Magnolia Hill. Perched on the property's highest rise, the house let Josiah Ellison survey his entire domain from the sweeping veranda that encircled three sides. Ornate iron gates guarded the entrance to a long oak-lined drive, their ancient branches arching overhead like a natural tunnel leading straight to the imposing front steps. Patriarch Josiah Ellison had come to Alabama in 1825 with little more than ambition, a modest inheritance from his late father, and 3 enslaved people he had inherited: a man named Moses, his wife Ruth, and their teenage son Samuel. He began with just 50 acres, working side by side with his laborers in those first hard years. His hands grew as rough and calloused as theirs while he cleared land, planted cotton, and steadily enlarged his holdings. Known for his tireless drive and sharp business sense, Josiah earned admiration from equals and dread from anyone he bested in land deals or cotton trades. By 1835, only 10 years after his arrival, he had become one of the region's wealthiest cotton planters. His land now exceeded 500 acres, and nearly 40 enslaved people worked under him. The rough cabin of his early days had been replaced by the magnificent plantation house, finished in 1838 to match his rising place in Alabama society. Josiah especially prized the carved wooden staircase that spiraled through the center of the home. Every baluster had been handcrafted by a gifted enslaved carpenter he bought specifically for the job. In 1830, he married Elizabeth Montgomery, daughter of a neighboring planter. 20 years his junior, she possessed delicate beauty, quiet resolve, amber eyes that seemed to guard secrets, and pale blonde hair styled in the elaborate fashions favored by wealthy Southern women. Their courtship was short, arranged mostly by her father, who recognized in Josiah an ambitious man whose drive mirrored his own. The wedding took place at St. James Episcopal Church in the county seat, attended by the area's most prominent families. A 3-day reception followed at the Montgomery plantation, as was customary among the rich at that time. Elizabeth brought a generous dowry, 10 skilled house slaves trained in cooking, sewing, and household management, plus family heirlooms reaching back to early Virginia colonial days. Most striking was a silver hand mirror, its handle intricately shaped like twisting vines and bearing the Montgomery crest. Elizabeth was seldom seen without it nearby. She would often pause in her daily routine to stare into its surface with an intensity that unsettled the house slaves. Their marriage produced 5 children: a son Thomas, born in 1831, followed by 4 daughters: Margaret in 1834, Catherine in 1836, Josephine in 1838, and little Sarah in 1844, after a long gap that had convinced many Elizabeth's childbearing years were finished. Each birth was marked by an elaborate christening, and as the family grew, so did Josiah's fortune and standing. By Sarah's arrival, the Ellison name meant prosperity across southern Alabama. The Ellisons were admired in their community, known for opening storehouses to struggling neighbors during the 1843 drought and for sending their physician to treat scarlet fever victims in 1845 who could not pay for care. These acts of kindness won gratitude, though a few quietly suggested the generosity was really a way to reinforce their superior position. Their harvest season balls were legendary, drawing guests from Mobile to Montgomery. The Christmas ball of 1846 remained especially vivid in memory, the mansion decorated with fresh pine boughs and red velvet ribbons, silver candelabras glowing warmly over elegantly dressed visitors. The banquet table sagged beneath roast turkey, glazed ham, oyster dressing, sweet potato pies, and syllabub, all prepared by Ruth, now head cook, who had been with the family since Josiah first arrived in Alabama. Every Sunday they arrived at St. James Episcopal Church in a polished carriage, pulled by 4 matched bay horses, the family in their finest clothes. Josiah served as a vestryman, giving generously to the church building fund and missionary work. Elizabeth taught Sunday school to the children of other planter families, her gentle yet firm moral guidance making her a favorite among them. The Ellisons always sat in the first pew, their presence a weekly symbol of their community rank. After services, they frequently invited the minister and selected parishioners for Sunday dinner, discussing theology and local matters over Elizabeth's famous peach cobbler. On the surface, they represented the height of antebellum Southern grace, a family favored by fortune and divine blessing, untouched by sorrow or want. Their enslaved workers were adequately fed and clothed by the era's standards, their fields thrived, and their future seemed secure in a world that prized lineage and land above everything. Yet beneath that polished exterior, a shadow was gathering, one that would devour the family over the next decade, leaving behind a legacy of dread and superstition that lingers to this day. Some claimed it started with the land purchase itself, a deal old timers had warned against. Others blamed Elizabeth's odd habits, her interest in books proper Southern ladies should never read, her late night walks across the grounds. A few spoke in hushed tones of the ancient oak tree at the property's edge, a huge, gnarled giant that predated the Ellisons, its twisted branches lifting skyward like pleading hands. The house slaves held their own quiet theories, shared only after dark in the quarters. Bessie, Elizabeth's personal maid, said she had seen her mistress speaking to empty air beneath that oak on moonlit nights, using words in a tongue she had never heard. Moses, now elderly but still tending the gardens, insisted flowers near the tree grew unnaturally large and bright, yet gave off a cloying sweet scent that caused headaches and strange dreams. Young Samuel, grown and now serving as Thomas's valet, once claimed to see pale figures drifting among the branches, until he was whipped for spreading foolish tales. If the family heard these murmurs, they showed no sign. Life at Magnolia Hill moved on in its orderly cycle. Seasons of planting and harvest, balls and dinners, the steady growth and education of the children, until the summer of 1845, when everything shifted. Our story truly opens in the summer of 1845, as Margaret Ellison prepared for her 16th birthday. In antebellum Southern society, a girl's 16th year marked her passage from child to woman, the moment she would be formally introduced to society and begin the search for a proper husband. For the daughter of a wealthy planter like Josiah, this was a momentous occasion, celebrated with a grand coming-out ball and a commissioned portrait to mark the event. Margaret was lively and spirited, with chestnut hair cascading in natural waves to her waist and her father's resolute gray eyes. Unlike many girls of her class content with needlework and pianoforte, she possessed a fierce intellect that sometimes worried her mother. She read voraciously from her father's library, histories, philosophy, even medical books deemed entirely unsuitable for young ladies. She shone in literature and French, tutored by her governess, Miss Abigail Porter, a Boston spinster who had come south for work after her family's shipping firm collapsed. Miss Porter saw Margaret's exceptional mind and nurtured it, occasionally to Elizabeth's displeasure. "She'll never attract a husband if she keeps quoting Voltaire at dinner," Elizabeth once grumbled to Josiah, after an awkward evening with the neighboring Beaumont family, whose son James was viewed as an excellent match. Josiah, however, took quiet pride in his daughter's keen thoughts. "She'll marry when and whom she pleases," he answered. "I'd rather have a daughter with ideas than one who only simpers and pours tea." In the weeks before her birthday, Margaret grew unusually withdrawn, spending long hours alone in her room or wandering the gardens, especially near the old oak. The change was noticed by everyone's siblings, house slaves, even visitors. Thomas, home from the University of Alabama, told their father Margaret seemed somehow diminished, as though part of her had already slipped away. Miss Porter's leather-bound journal, found decades later in a distant relative's attic, recorded her private conversations with Margaret during those weeks. The pages, yellowed but the ink still clear, captured the governess's growing alarm. On June 12, 1845, she wrote, "Margaret confided in me today about her dreams. She describes a woman with hollow eyes who calls her name. The figure appears every night, always beneath the old oak on the eastern boundary. Margaret says the woman wears an old-fashioned white dress, hair loose over her shoulders in a way no respectable lady would allow in public. The woman never speaks aloud, yet Margaret hears her voice inside her mind, calling her daughter and promising to bring her home. I told her it was likely too many Gothic novels before bed, but the haunted look in her eyes troubles me deeply." A week later, June 19, the dreams have intensified. Now she sees several women, all in white, all with that same hollow gaze. They sing to her, a wordless melody that lingers after she wakes. She hummed it for me today. The strange atonal sequence raised the hairs on my arms. I urged her to tell her mother, but she grew agitated. "Mother already knows," she said in a voice so cold it hardly sounded like hers. "She's always known they would come for me." Miss Porter brought her worries to Josiah, who brushed them aside as the overwrought fancy of a girl nearing womanhood. Mr. Ellison suggested more fresh air and exercise, less time with books. She noted on June 25. He directed me to shift lessons toward household management rather than literature or philosophy. When I tried to convey the disturbing nature of her dreams, he interrupted, "Miss Porter, I ask you to educate my daughter, not to interpret her nightmares. I fear there is more happening in this house than anyone will admit." On the morning of Margaret's birthday, July 15, 1845, the household buzzed with preparations for the evening's grand celebration. Dawn arrived clear and warm, promising an ideal summer day. Slaves hurried across house and grounds, carrying out Elizabeth's precise orders for the season's premier social event. In the kitchen, Ruth oversaw Margaret's favorite dishes: roast duck in orange glaze, sweet potato soufflé, fresh corn pudding, and a towering 3-layer cake decorated with crystallized violets that had taken young assistant cook Lucinda 2 full days to perfect. In the ballroom, crystal chandeliers were polished and fitted with fresh beeswax candles, their glow to be enhanced by silver candelabras placed around the room. Garlands of magnolia, roses, and jasmine from the gardens draped the staircase and twined around the front portico columns. The pianoforte had been tuned the previous day by a specialist from Mobile. A string quartet from the same city was due by mid-afternoon. Thomas rose early to supervise the erection of a lawn dance pavilion for younger guests who preferred the open air. Josephine and Catherine, thrilled in their new pale pink and lavender silk dresses, practiced steps in the morning room under Elizabeth's watchful corrections of posture and hand placement. Despite the festive mood ahead, Elizabeth appeared distracted, her eyes repeatedly drifting toward the window that framed the distant old oak. Twice she was overheard muttering to herself. When spoken to, she quickly smoothed her expression into a calm smile and carried on as though nothing was wrong. Josiah had commissioned a portrait of Margaret as her birthday gift. The artist, Frenchman Henry Beaumont, newly established in Mobile, was expected the following week. Josiah spent the morning in his study, reviewing the final guest list with his overseer and confirming overnight accommodations for out-of-town visitors. 57 guests had accepted, including the governor's secretary and his wife. A connection Josiah hoped might open political doors. Margaret herself passed the early hours in her room at her writing desk, penning letters to finishing school friends unable to attend. She wore a simple pale blue muslin morning dress, hair braided and pinned for the elaborate style planned later. According to her lady's maid, young enslaved woman Delia, Margaret seemed calm yet distant, answering questions with single words and staring long into her mirror. She received family gifts with polite thanks, a leather-bound journal embossed with her initials from her mother, a silver locket holding miniature portraits of her parents from Thomas, a collection of Shakespeare's sonnets in Moroccan leather from her sisters, and a volume of poetry from Miss Porter. Those closest to her noticed the usual spark of delight in her eyes was missing. At midday, with the July sun blazing overhead and heat pressing down like a heavy blanket, Margaret asked to walk alone in the gardens for a brief moment of quiet before guests arrived. The request was unusual. Proper young ladies rarely sought solitude, especially on such a day. But Elizabeth, preoccupied with a minor dinner plate crisis, agreed without much thought. She did instruct Bessie, her longtime personal maid, to watch from a distance. "The sun is fierce," she warned. "See she doesn't stay out long enough to ruin her complexion." Bessie, a tall, dignified woman in her 50s, graying hair tucked beneath a white head wrap, nodded and followed at a discreet remove as Margaret moved through the formal rear gardens. Neat gravel paths divided beds of roses, foxgloves, and hydrangeas. At the center stood a small marble fountain with a cherub pouring water from an urn, its gentle splash the only sound besides insect hum and far-off field calls. According to Bessie's later testimony during the investigation, Margaret walked with unusual purpose, striding rather than the leisurely stroll expected of her class. She paused at the fountain, trailing fingers through the water, then continued toward the eastern edge, where cultivated beds gave way to wilder ground. Beyond the last roses lay a meadow of wildflowers, then dense woodland marking the property line. The old oak loomed there, a dark shape against the bright midday sky. Bessie watched the pale blue dress move among vivid summer blooms. Margaret appeared to wander. Yet Bessie, having raised 5 children before they were sold away, recognized the deliberate direction. The girl was circling toward the oak, though by a winding path that might fool a less attentive eye. Concerned, Bessie drew closer, leaving the kitchen garden to trail Margaret into the meadow. Tall grass brushed her skirts. She frowned at the thought of Margaret soiling her fine hem. She was about to call out about the time when a distraction caught her. A prized Dominique hen had escaped its pen and was pecking near the garden shed. Knowing the cook's dependence on the birds, Bessie turned briefly to herd it back. The task took only moments. The hen cooperated, scurrying ahead of her hands toward the barnyard. But when Bessie looked back, her heart seized. The meadow was empty. Margaret, in her unmistakable pale blue dress, had vanished completely. Bessie called out, her voice ringing across the open space, but no reply came. She hurried forward, scanning the tall grass, thinking perhaps Margaret had sat to rest or pick flowers. The meadow was small, barely 50 yards before the woods, and anyone standing should have been plainly visible. Yet Margaret was gone, as though she had never been there. At first no one panicked. When Bessie rushed breathless back to the house and reported losing sight of Margaret, Elizabeth sighed with the irritation of a mother whose schedule was being appended. "She's likely gone to the spring house to cool off," she said, adjusting a dining table arrangement, "or perhaps to the stables. She's always like that new mare." She sent a kitchen boy to check both places, expecting a quick resolution. As the afternoon wore on, and the first carriages appeared on the long drive, worry mounted. Thomas and 2 house slaves searched the immediate grounds, spring house, stables, smokehouse, even slave quarters, though it was unthinkable Margaret would go there unchaperoned. No trace, no sighting since she entered the garden with Bessie trailing. Josiah, initially annoyed at what he saw as a childish prank on so important a day, now paced the veranda, his face darkening with each failed report. "She must be found before guests arrive," he said tightly. "I will not have the Bowmans and Calhouns met by a household in chaos because my daughter chose today for some foolish game." When early arrivals began appearing and the birthday girl was still missing, concern turned to panic. Elizabeth, keeping brittle composure while greeting guests, sent them off with vague excuses about Margaret resting before the festivities. Meanwhile, Josiah rallied male servants and slaves into search parties to scour the wider grounds. As the sun sank westward, casting long shadows over lawns and fields, the search intensified. House and gardens were examined room by room, closet by closet, outbuilding by outbuilding, multiple times. As twilight fell with no sign of Margaret, Josiah reluctantly told the gathered guests his daughter had fallen suddenly ill and the celebration must be postponed. Sympathetic murmurs and offers of help followed. Josiah declined them all with strained politeness. With the last disappointed guests gone, the search spread to surrounding fields and woods. Slaves were roused from quarters to join, carrying torches and lanterns into the darkness. Neighboring planters, hearing the news through departing visitors, sent overseers and hands to help. A rare show of unity among the competitive cotton elite. Lanterns flickered across Magnolia Hill all night, catching on magnolia leaves and the creek's rippling surface along the western boundary. Men shouted Margaret's name until their voices cracked, echoes returning unanswered from the trees. Bloodhounds from the Crawford plantation 5 miles east were brought in. They circled the last seen area in confusion, but found no trail leading away. By midnight, exhausted and without any sign, some searchers began whispering darker possibilities. Had runaway slaves taken her? Rumors spoke of a band hiding in southern swamps, occasionally raiding isolated farms. But Magnolia Hill was hardly isolated, and no other disturbances had been noted. Others wondered about a secret elopement gone wrong, though Margaret showed no interest in county suitors, and her movements were always supervised. She had taken nothing, not even a shawl against the night chill, so the idea was quickly dismissed. As dawn broke on July 16, a single discovery deepened the enigma. The only clue was one white satin slipper, with pearl button closure. Part of the new pair Elizabeth had ordered from Mobile, especially for the celebration. Samuel, Thomas's valet, found it while searching alone long after others had paused for rest. The slipper lay on its side at the base of the old oak, the very tree from Margaret's dreams. Its fabric pristine despite the dew-soaked ground. Samuel called for Josiah, who arrived moments later, disheveled from the night search, eyes red, clothes wrinkled, and sweat stained. Seeing the slipper, he dropped to his knees, reaching toward it with shaking hands but stopping short, as though afraid it might vanish. "This is hers," he rasped. "This is what she was to wear tonight. But where is the other? Where is my daughter?" A careful sweep of the area found nothing else. Ground around the tree undisturbed. No struggle marks. No departing footprints. Grass stood upright, untrampled. Bark showed no climbing scars, no broken branches suggesting ascent into the canopy. The lone slipper rested alone, a silent witness to Margaret's presence and her disappearance. Most unsettling was the shoe's condition, completely dry despite heavy overnight dew that left every other surface slick. When Josiah finally lifted it, handling it like a sacred object, he found it warm, as though freshly slipped from a living foot, though it had clearly lain there for hours. "This isn't natural," one enslaved woman whispered, only to be silenced by the overseer's sharp glance. Yet her words echoed what many felt. Something uncanny clung to that solitary slipper, hinting at forces beyond comprehension. In the days that followed, Josiah spared no cost in the hunt for his eldest daughter. Private investigators arrived from Mobile and Montgomery. Large rewards were posted for any information. Notices appeared in newspapers across Alabama and neighboring states, detailing Margaret's description and the circumstances of her vanishing. Newcomers to the county were questioned closely at Josiah's insistence. As July gave way to August with no sign, his desperation grew. He hired a renowned Cherokee tracker known for finding those who wished to stay hidden, paying a fortune for the man to study the oak site. After a day of silent observation, the tracker returned Josiah's gold, saying only, "This is not a matter for my skills. Your daughter walks paths I cannot follow." By September, hope waning and ordinary methods failing, Josiah turned to unorthodox means. Despite his role as vestryman and past scorn for heathen beliefs, he now sought those claiming ties to the unseen. A conjure woman from the swamps, known only as Mother Surreal, was smuggled in under cover of night. She performed rituals with herbs and bones, chanting in blended French and African tongues, but offered no clear answers. Only vague warnings about women who wait beyond the veil. In October, at Elizabeth's urging, Josiah summoned a New Orleans spiritualist, Madame Lavo, famed for speaking with the dead. The seance, held in the formal parlor with only family present, ended abruptly when the medium spoke in a high, childlike voice Elizabeth recognized with a gasp as Margaret C. "The women in white have welcomed me home. Do not seek what is freely given." Madame Lavo collapsed. Upon waking, she remembered nothing. The Southern Sentinel published weekly updates, but as summer faded to autumn, stories shrank from front page headlines to brief inside notes mentioning the standing reward and lack of progress. Elizabeth took to her bed, overwhelmed by grief. 17-year-old Thomas assumed management of the plantation while his father chased every rumor. The younger girls were kept under constant watch, forbidden to wander alone even indoors. The oak tree, once a proud landmark, became an object of terror. Slaves refused to work near it, crossing themselves or making protective signs when forced to pass. Josiah considered felling it, but could not bring himself to order the cut, haunted by the irrational fear that destroying the tree might sever his last link to Margaret. Miss Porter's journal entries from this time describe a house wrapped in dread. "A terrible silence has replaced the music and laughter," she wrote. Mrs. Ellison wakes screaming, saying she sees Margaret at the foot of her bed, clothes soaked as though caught in rain. The other children are afraid, though they try to hide it. Little Catherine asked yesterday if she too would vanish at 16. I had no answer to give her. Eventually, life at Magnolia Hill found a strained new rhythm, broken only by Josiah's ever more frantic searches. He traveled as far as New York and Boston, following reported sightings, always returning emptier, more hollow-eyed. The once vigorous planter now moved like a man decades older, shoulders bent, gaze forever scanning the horizon as though Margaret might appear at any moment. By summer 1847, the active search had largely ended. The Ellisons held a memorial service for Margaret, though Elizabeth insisted a place be set for her at dinner every night. She might come home hungry, she would murmur, eyes fixed on some distant point. Then, as July neared again, the family faced a grim new reality. Catherine's 16th birthday approached. Catherine had always been the practical sister, less dreamy than Margaret, more focused on household management than books or music. She inherited her mother's blonde hair, but her father's steady gaze, and no-nonsense manner, traits sharpened by the loss of her sister. In the 2 years since Margaret vanished, Catherine had grown up fast, taking on many of Elizabeth's duties while her mother remained fragile and often bedridden with ailments no doctor could name or cure. As her birthday neared, Catherine showed none of Margaret's troubling dreams. She kept to her brisk routine, directing house slaves with quiet competence beyond her years. When Miss Porter gently asked about her sleep, Catherine answered plainly, "I sleep soundly, thank you. I have no time for nightmares. I don't believe in coincidences or curses. Margaret's disappearance was a tragedy, but it won't happen to me. Father has extra men watching the grounds, and I won't wander off alone." Josiah had indeed taken every precaution. Armed patrols circled the plantation day and night. The old oak had been felled and its wood burned, despite protests from older slaves who warned disturbing the tree would only invite worse luck. Catherine was never left unattended. A companion slept in her room, and she was escorted everywhere by day. On the morning of Catherine's birthday, October 3, 1847, the house felt thick with tension. Elizabeth had not risen in days, overwhelmed by memories of Margaret's loss. Josiah moved through the rooms in a daze, checking and rechecking guard posts. Catherine remained outwardly calm, though Miss Porter noted a quiet resignation, as though she braced for something inevitable. The day passed without event. Catherine accepted her gifts, shared a modest cake with family, and retired early, worn by the constant vigilance and unspoken dread. Just before dawn the screams began. Harriet, a cousin staying as Catherine's companion since Margaret's disappearance, woke to find the bed empty. She raised the alarm. Within minutes the household erupted in chaos. Catherine's nightgown lay neatly folded on the bed, as though she had simply stepped out of it. The window was closed and latched from inside. The door was locked, key still in the keyhole on the room's inner side. Yet Catherine Ellison was gone. The search was immediate and desperate. Guards swore no one had neared the house all night. No one had left. Bloodhounds found no scent beyond the bedroom. It was an impossible echo of Margaret's vanishing, this time from a locked room inside a watched and guarded home. The second loss shattered Josiah. He no longer spoke of finding his daughters. Instead, he became fixated on shielding those who remained. 14-year-old Josephine and 3-year-old Sarah were moved into the master bedroom so both parents could watch them constantly. The plantation began to fail. Josiah neglected fields to erect ever more elaborate defenses around the house, iron bars on every window, extra locks on every door. No one entered or left without his direct approval. Elizabeth withdrew further into herself, speaking to her absent daughters as though they sat beside her, setting their places at table, folding their clothes, arranging flowers in empty bedrooms. Slaves whispered among themselves that the land had turned against the Ellisons, that they had built on ground that rejected them. Some mentioned an old burial ground plowed under when the plantation was founded, spirits disturbed and seeking retribution. Others blamed Madame Laveau, saying her sayings had opened a door that could not be shut. Miss Porter's journal grew more troubled. I fear for my sanity here. Last night I dreamed of Catherine crossing the cotton fields in her white nightgown, though no wind blew. When she turned, her face was ancient, eyes dark hollows in a withered mask. Behind her walked Margaret, and behind Margaret a line of women I did not know, all in white, all with that same empty gaze. They sang a melody I could not quite catch, yet it filled me with such dread I woke screaming. Mrs. Ellison only looked at me and said, "You've seen them too then. God help us all." By 1849 the once thriving Ellison plantation lay in ruins. Many slaves had been sold to cover debts after 2 years of failed cotton crops. The remaining house servants murmured that the land was cursed, that nothing would flourish until the Ellisons left. Yet time marched on, bringing Josephine's 16th birthday closer. Josephine had been 12 when Margaret vanished, 14 when Catherine followed. Now, as April 1849 neared, she had become a solemn young woman who seldom smiled and never stepped beyond the house walls. Unlike her sisters, she seemed to await her fate with grim acceptance. She came to me last night, Miss Porter wrote in February 1849. She asked if I would take Sarah north before April arrives. "They won't stop with me," she said. "They'll take Sarah too when her time comes. But you can save her, Miss Porter. Take her north. Change her name. Never speak of the Ellisons again." When I asked who they were, she looked at me as though I were foolish and answered, "The women in white, of course. The ones who were here before us, the ones we displaced." I promised to consider it, though I knew Mr. Ellison would never allow his youngest out of his sight, much less into my sole care. As April drew near, Josiah's preparations turned almost frantic. He dismissed the last house servants, trusting no one outside family. He boarded every entrance save one, which he guarded himself, rifle in hand. He consulted engineers about an underground safe room for Josephine, but his funds were too low for such work. In a rare moment of clarity, Elizabeth suggested they abandon the plantation entirely. "We'll go north," she said one March night at dinner. "Change our names, start fresh where this shadow cannot reach us." Josiah refused. "This is our home," he insisted. "I built it from nothing. I will not be driven off by whatever this is. We stand our ground. We break this curse." As the day approached, Josephine withdrew further. She spent hours staring through barred windows, expression unreadable. Sometimes she hummed a strange, atonal melody that raised the hairs on listeners' necks. On the eve of her birthday, April 22, 1849, Josephine asked to speak privately with her father. What passed between them was never written down, but Josiah emerged shaken. He summoned the few remaining staff and ordered the carriage prepared. At first light, he declared, the family would leave for Mobile, then sail to Boston where his brother lived. It was the first flicker of hope the household had seen in months. Miss Porter helped Elizabeth pack essentials while Josiah secured what valuables remained. 5-year-old Sarah was told they were going on an adventure. She clapped in delight, too young to grasp the desperation driving their flight. They worked through the night, planning to depart before dawn. Josephine remained calm, almost serene, as she helped her mother choose keepsakes. "Only what we need," she reminded them. "What can buy new things in Boston?" As the first gray light touched the horizon, the family gathered in the entrance hall. Trunks ready, prepared to abandon the house that had become their cage. Josiah counted heads: Elizabeth, Josephine, Sarah, Miss Porter. All accounted for. "Where is Thomas?" he asked, realizing his son was missing. 21-year-old Thomas had been sent to ready the horses. He should have returned already. Josiah opened the single unboarded door and stepped onto the porch, calling Thomas's name. No answer came. The carriage waited, but neither son nor horses were in sight. "Stay here," Josiah told the women. "Bar the door behind me. I'll find him." Miss Porter secured the door as instructed. The four huddled in the hall, listening to the oppressive silence pressing in. "He's coming for me," Josephine whispered, eerily calm. "I can hear him calling." Elizabeth clutched Sarah close, murmuring prayers. Miss Porter tried to soothe them. Perhaps Thomas had trouble with a horse. Josiah would return soon and they'd leave. But minutes stretched to an hour, then 2. Fear thickened. Outside, the sun rose, sending long shadows through cracks in the boarded windows. Sarah first noticed the humming, low, melodic, seeming to rise from everywhere and nowhere. Josephine lifted her head, listening, then smiled, a terrible, knowing smile that aged her young face into something ancient. "They're here," she said simply. Before anyone could react, she walked to the front door, lifted the bar, and stepped outside. Miss Porter lunged, catching her wrist, but Josephine turned with such tranquil certainty that the governess's grip loosened. "It's all right," Josephine said. "This is how it must be. Look after Sarah. Remember your promise." She pulled free and descended the porch steps, white dress bright in the morning light. Elizabeth screamed, rushing to the doorway. Something halted her at the threshold. An unseen barrier she struck with her fists, wailing her daughter's name. Miss Porter, feeling no resistance, started after Josephine but froze at the sight. Across the overgrown lawn stood 7 women in white, faces indistinct, forms wavering like heat above hot ground. Among them, Miss Porter later swore, were Margaret and Catherine, serene, hands outstretched toward their sister. Josephine approached without hesitation. As she reached them, the women parted, revealing the old oak stump, now impossibly sprouting new growth, a slender sapling rising from charred wood. Josephine knelt, placed her hands on the fresh green shoots, and between one heartbeat and the next, all 8 women vanished. The lawn lay empty save for the sapling, now suddenly a young tree, branches stretching skyward. Josiah and Thomas Ellison were never seen again. No trace was ever found. The property, abandoned, fell deeper into ruin. Elizabeth, shattered by losing nearly her entire family in 4 years, took Sarah and Miss Porter and fled to her Virginia kin. She never spoke of the Ellisons again. When pressed, she said only that her husband and elder children had died of fever. Sarah grew up as Sarah Montgomery, raised by her maternal grandparents as their own. Elizabeth died in 1855, never recovering from the trauma of those final Alabama days. Miss Porter stayed with the Montgomerys as Sarah's governess until the girl came of age. In 1860, as war loomed over the divided nation, she gathered her journals and the fragments of the Ellison story she had assembled, sealed them in a cedar box, and instructed they remain unopened until after her death. That box stayed untouched until 1902, when renovations to the old Montgomery house in Richmond uncovered it. By then, both Miss Porter and Sarah were long gone, Sarah having died of tuberculosis in 1870 at 26. The journals might have been dismissed as the delusions of a troubled mind, except for one chilling detail. Sarah died on her birthday, July 7, the day she turned 26. Not 16 like her sisters, yet still her birthday. In her final moments, according to the attending physician's notes, she looked toward the window, smiled, and said clearly, "They've come for me, at last. My sisters have waited so long." What of the Ellison plantation itself? After the war, the land was divided and sold to former slaves and northern investors. The house, what remained, was demolished in 1867. Only the oak tree endured, now grown enormous despite its violent past. Local legend claimed that, on certain nights, especially spring and summer, near the birth dates of the Ellison daughters, the tree would be ringed by flickering lights like lanterns, carried by unseen hands. Those brave or foolish enough to approach spoke of women's voices singing an unfamiliar melody and a deep sense of peace laced with sorrow. In 1897, a University of Alabama historian, Dr. William Harcourt, grew interested after finding old newspaper references to the disappearances. He spent months researching, interviewing elderly locals who might have known the family or the plantation. His findings pointed to a deeper, older mystery. The land Josiah bought had indeed been a burial ground, not of local tribes as slave rumors suggested, but of an obscure religious sect that settled briefly in the late 1700s before vanishing under strange circumstances. Mostly women, they blended Christian worship with older pagan rites. Their leader, Mother Abigail, claimed visions from woman beyond the veil. A few records survived, but surviving accounts said the sect was accused of witchcraft after several young men from nearby settlements disappeared following contact with them. In spring 1798, a mob descended on their compound to drive them out, or worse. They found buildings empty, the women gone without trace. The only living thing left was a massive oak in the settlement center, its bark carved with strange symbols. Locals tried to fell the tree. Every axe broke on contact. Eventually they gave up, declared the place cursed, and avoided it for decades. Until Josiah Ellison, newly arrived from Virginia and ignorant of local history, purchased it for his plantation. Dr. Harcourt's research turned personal when he learned his own great-grandmother belonged to Mother Abigail's sect. Among family papers he found a letter she wrote just before the group vanished. We go to join those who came before, beyond the veil where time flows differently. The tree is our anchor and our gateway. Through it we will return when needed, to reclaim what is ours and to welcome our scattered daughters home. They will know us by the calling in their blood, by the dreams that arrive as their 16th year nears. None can stop what has been set in motion. We are patient. We can wait. Harcourt published his findings in a small academic journal in 1899, proposing the Ellison disappearances might link to this earlier history. Colleagues dismissed his theories as fanciful. He was urged to return to more respectable work. Disheartened but undeterred, he made one last visit to the Ellison property in summer 1900. The land had been subdivided into smaller farms, but the oak still towered, its branches spreading wide over what had once been the plantation's heart. Harcourt camped beneath the tree, planning to spend the night and note any unusual events. He was never seen again. His equipment was found the next morning, including his journal. The final entry read, "Midnight. The humming has begun, just as locals described. It defies description. Not quite music, not quite language, something between." The air around the tree shimmers, as though the boundary between worlds has thinned. I see figures among the branches, women in white, faces both young and impossibly ancient. They look at me. They know why I've come. One, could it be Mother Abigail? Beckons. I should be afraid, but I feel only curiosity and a strange homecoming, as though I was expected. I'm going to approach them. God forgive me if this is madness, but I must know the truth. The oak still stands today, preserved as a historical landmark. Though few recall the real reason for its protection, local children dare one another to spend nights beneath its branches, but none have vanished. At least none admit it. Yet whispers persist. Women in white seen walking fields on moonlit nights, strange humming rising from the ground around the oak's roots, dreams that visit girls nearing 16, dreams of women calling them home. And occasionally, very occasionally, a girl does disappear, usually one with no local ties, perhaps visiting relatives or passing through. Searches find nothing. Cases go cold. Life continues. Except for those who know the history, who see the pattern, who understand that some hungers outlast time and flesh. Patient, persistent, waiting. Some say that if you stand beneath the oak at midnight on July 15th, the anniversary of Margaret's disappearance, you can hear all 4 Ellison daughters singing together in perfect, terrible harmony. Their song is beautiful and horrifying, promise and warning woven tight. We are waiting, they seem to sing. We have always been waiting. And when your time comes, we will be waiting for you, too. The macabre legacy of the Ellisons endures, a whispered tale carried across generations, a caution to those who would raise fortunes on unwelcoming ground, a reminder that some mysteries are not meant to be solved, only observed from afar, acknowledged with respect and more than a little fear. As for the oak, it keeps growing, roots sinking deep into soil fed by secrets. The last survey measured its trunk over 30 feet around, making it one of Alabama's largest and oldest oaks. Experts remain puzzled. Records suggest it cannot be more than 150 years old. But time flows differently for some things, doesn't it? Especially for those with patience, purpose, and an endless hunger satisfied only by certain souls. Sleep well tonight, dear viewers. And if humming fills your dreams, if women in white beckon from the shadows, perhaps it's wisest not to follow. Some invitations, once accepted, can never be refused. This has been Last Dictarin. Until next time, remember the past is never truly gone. It simply waits for its moment to return. In the years after Dr. Harcourt vanished, interest in the Ellison case faded. The academic world, embarrassed by what they saw as the delusions of a once respected colleague, quietly withdrew his work from circulation. Local farmers working the subdivided lands avoided mentioning odd events near the oak, fearing it would hurt property values. But in 1927 the story resurfaced when Eleanor Pritchard, a student at Alabama Women's College, chose the Ellison disappearances as her thesis topic in American folklore. Unlike earlier researchers, Eleanor treated the case not as a puzzle to crack, but as a living folk narrative reflecting the region's anxieties and beliefs. Her work went beyond newspaper clippings and deeds. She tracked down descendants of those connected to the Ellisons, gathering oral histories never written before. The picture that emerged was more complex. Josiah had not simply bought the land. According to the granddaughter of his former overseer, he won it in a card game from a desperate man eager to be rid of it. That man warned Josiah the land was cursed. No one prospered there long. Josiah, young and arrogant with ambition, laughed off the caution. More troubling were stories about Elizabeth Montgomery Ellison. Far from the fragile belle of early accounts, she had reportedly shown interest in the occult in her youth. Her family had ties to New Orleans. She spent seasons there before marriage. Said to have studied with voodoo practitioners and other mystics. The most shocking account came from Bessie Johnson, once a house slave at Magnolia Hill, who at 98 was among the last living witnesses. In a 1927 recorded interview with Eleanor, she said, "Miss Elizabeth knew what that land was. She knew what lived in that oak tree. She thought she could control it, strike some bargain. I heard her late at night, talking to something the rest of us couldn't see. She'd go to that tree with offerings. Locks of her children's hair, drops of their blood taken while they slept. Said she was protecting them, marking them as hers so the tree women wouldn't take them. But you can't bargain with spirits like that. They take what they want, when they want. When Eleanor asked why Elizabeth's behavior went unreported, Bessie laughed bitterly. Who was going to believe a slave over a plantation mistress? And Mr. Josiah didn't want to see. That man could blind himself to anything that threatened his cotton or his reputation. By the time he understood, it was too late. The bargain was made. The price was being collected. Eleanor's 1928 thesis framed the Ellison story as a collision of historical fact, supernatural belief, and antebellum social dynamics. She argued that the disappearances, whatever their true cause, had been understood through existing folk traditions about the land and its earlier inhabitants, creating a narrative that both warned and explained the inexplicable. The work earned high marks and notice from folklorists beyond Alabama. It also drew dangerous attention. Shortly after graduating, while visiting the oak for final photographs, Eleanor Pritchard vanished. Her camera and notebook were found at the tree's base. Of Eleanor herself, no trace. Her disappearance revived interest in the Ellison case and its linked vanishings. Authorities, embarrassed by another unsolved case, suggested Eleanor had faked it to add intrigue to her research, perhaps planning a sensational book. Her family and professors rejected the idea, citing her serious academic goals and an imminent Oxford fellowship. The case briefly became national news, with sensational papers proposing murder, cult involvement, anything lurid. After 6 months without evidence, it was classified unsolved and slowly forgotten. But Eleanor's thesis and her vanishing had one lasting impact. In 1930, the oak and surrounding 5 acres were designated a historical site, shielded from development or destruction. Officially, the reason was the tree's remarkable size and age. Locals knew the real motive. No one wanted to risk awakening whatever dwelled there. Through the Great Depression and World War II, the Ellison story remained a quiet local legend, resurfacing only when another young person vanished nearby. Though never widely noticed, the oak kept growing. Its massive limbs now shaded nearly half an acre, forming a cathedral, like space beneath, that stayed dim even on the brightest summer days. In 1965, a developer bought adjacent land, planning a middle-class subdivision. Ignoring local warnings, work began that spring. Problems started almost immediately. Equipment failed without reason. Workers felt watched, heard whispers in the rustling leaves. Several quit after nightmares of women in white calling their names. Developer Howard Daniels dismissed the fears as superstition. To prove the site safe, he announced he would spend July 15th, the anniversary of Margaret's disappearance, alone beneath the oak, broadcasting live on local radio. That night, Daniels arrived with a radio crew who set up 50 yards away. Equipped with a portable microphone and sleeping bag, he settled against the trunk, joking about ghost stories and the power of suggestion. There's nothing here but an impressive old tree and overactive imaginations, he told listeners. The Ellison disappearances, if they happened, likely had rational explanations. Young women ran away all the time in the restrictive antebellum South. As for Dr. Harcourt and that college girl Eleanor, history is full of opportunists who chose to disappear and start over. As midnight neared, his tone sobered. It's unnaturally quiet, he admitted around 11:30. No crickets, no night birds. The air feels heavy, but that's just summer humidity and the canopy's acoustics. At 11:45, static interrupted the broadcast. When Daniels returned, his voice was tense. Something's moving in the branches above me, he whispered. I'm told no animals nest here, but I hear footsteps almost, and a humming. Very faint, constant, probably just wind, though the air down here is still. At 11:55, he asked the crew to kill their spotlight. The light makes strange shadows. I keep thinking I see figures at the edge of the glow. It's distracting. "I'd rather sit in darkness these last minutes." The crew complied, though worried by his change in manner. In the dark his voice softened, thoughtful. "There's something peaceful here once you adjust. I can almost understand why someone would want to stay. It feels outside time, separate from the modern world's noise." At midnight, per the station log, Daniel's gasp. The microphone caught rustling fabric, then his voice, oddly distant. "They're here. My God, they're beautiful. Nothing to fear at all. They're just waiting. Always waiting." A sigh, then silence. Alarmed, the crew switched the spotlight back on and ran to the tree. Daniels was gone. His sleeping bag lay unzipped and empty. The microphone rested on the ground, still transmitting wind through oak leaves. The recorded broadcast became one of the station's most requested pieces. Audio experts found no tampering or staging. Whatever happened to Howard Daniels occurred exactly as listeners heard. His body was never recovered. The subdivision was abandoned. The land was later donated to the state, expanding the historical site to 15 acres. Now fenced and posted with warnings, the barriers deterred few. Over decades, the Oak became a pilgrimage spot for paranormal enthusiasts, thrill-seeking teens, grieving families seeking lost loved ones. All came to stand beneath its branches, to listen for humming, to watch for women in white. Not all left again. Disappearances were rare and scattered enough to avoid obvious patterns. To outsiders, a college student in 1972, a paranormal researcher in 1984, a young mother in 1991, a retired history teacher in 2003, all last seen near the Oak. Authorities, tired of unsolvable cases and reluctant to fuel more reckless visits, usually labeled them voluntary. People who walked away from their lives, using the tree's reputation as cover. Perhaps they were correct. Perhaps each vanishing had mundane explanations unrelated to women in white or bargains with the unknown. Perhaps the Ellison story was only tragic coincidence, embroidered over time into something supernatural. But then how to explain the dreams that still visit girls in the region nearing 16? Dreams of women calling their names, beckoning toward a great oak where safety and belonging wait. Dreams so vivid, so insistent, that parents in 3 counties send daughters to distant relatives until the perilous birthday passes. How to explain the oak's defiance of natural growth? Arborists and botanists who take core samples find rings suggesting barely 150 years, matching the time since Josephine knelt at the charred stump and vanished. Yet its size belongs to a tree at least 500 years old. And how to explain the objects that occasionally appear at its base? A white satin slipper with pearl button, perfectly preserved. A silver locket holding a miniature of a solemn chestnut-haired young woman. A leather-bound journal blank, except for one faded line on the first page. "They are calling me home." These items appear and vanish without pattern. Visitors see them one moment, the next they are gone. Photographs show only blur where the object should be, as though it exists partly in another reality, imperfectly crossing into ours. In 2015, a popular paranormal TV show spent 3 nights near the Oak with cutting-edge equipment. Their special episode captured unexplained temperature drops, audio of women's voices singing in an unknown language, and infrared video showing human-like figures moving among branches, visible only on camera. The most striking moment came on night 3. The team's lone woman, skeptical technician Jordan, reported feeling drawn to the tree. Cameras followed as she approached, her professional detachment giving way to wonder. "They're talking to me," she whispered, hand reaching toward the trunk. "They say I belong with them, that I always have." Her colleagues, alarmed, physically held her back from touching the bark. Jordan later remembered nothing of the incident. She resigned from the show soon after, citing personal reasons. Her social media went quiet months later. Fans searching for her have found nothing. Producers say they lost contact after her departure. Her family, approached by reporters, refused comment, saying only that Jordan found her path and wishes to be left in peace. So the Ellison mystery persists, neither fully explained nor conclusively disproven. A shadow tale hovering at reason's edge. The oak still stands, still grows, still whispers to those who listen. The women in white still walk its branches on moonlit nights, still hum their strange melody, still wait with inhuman patience for the next daughter to come home. For some secrets belong not to history, but to something older, something that predates human memory and will outlast us all. Some hungers cross time and flesh, enduring through centuries, patient and relentless. And some stories, once started, have no true end, only a continuing, a becoming, a slow inevitable unfolding we can witness, but never fully grasp. So if curiosity ever pulls you toward a lone massive oak, amid protected acres in southern Alabama, remember the Ellison daughters. Remember Eleanor Pritchard. Remember Howard Daniels. Remember all who sought answers there and became part of the question instead. Listen for the humming. Watch for the women in white. And ask yourself, are you certain you know who is calling you home? This has been Last Dictarin. Until we meet again, remember some mysteries are best admired from a safe distance, and some calls are best left unanswered. In the gentle glow of your screen, in the safety of your home, the Ellison story may feel like nothing more than an entertaining chill, a pleasant diversion. But somewhere in Alabama, beneath an oak that should not exist yet grows impossibly ancient, the women in white are still waiting. They have all the time in the world.